Hello, and welcome to the UK Wildlife Podcast. I'm Neil Phillips.
And I'm Victoria Hillman.
Well, it's been an interesting week of sitting in the house again for both of us, pretty much.
There's been a lot of work going on in the garden as well.
Oh, yeah.
In Somerset, a lot of garden work going on.
I did go for an exercise walk as well, so that was good. More about that later. Right, we'll start with the podcast news. Some sort of jingle at some point I'll do, but never mind.
We'll do a quick followers update on our social media channels. We're up to 226 on Twitter and 345 on Facebook. So big thank you and welcome to all of our new followers, and also big thank you and hello to all of our regulars that have been following us since the start. So thank you. Hope you're all keeping well.
And our downloads have gone past 6,000 now, so we're in 6,107. So that's rather nice as well. Thanks everyone again.
Yeah, a big massive thank you for that. That's brilliant.
We've both been busy cheating on each other's podcast on this podcast, haven't we, this week?
We have.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've both been on Jack Perk's new podcast. Check it out. Bearded Tit. It's on Podbean, so if you give it a search on Apple Podcasts, you should be able to find it. And yeah, it's quite interesting. Basically talks to photographers about various topics and some natural history topics as well. And he's had Stephen Moss on as well, the guest on our last podcast. So yeah.
Yeah, so give it a listen. So both Neil and I are on up and coming episodes with our respective specialities. So yeah, give it a listen, and definitely going to have to get Jack on. Hi Jack.
Yeah, we will.
At some point.
Hello Jack. Hello. Yeah, I already warned him. Yeah. So what was your topic then?
Mine was. I bet you can't guess what mine was.
Frogs and toads, perhaps.
It was absolutely frogs and toads, and we did actually discuss snakes and also ethical wildlife photography as well.
Oh, nice. I bet you can guess what mine was.
Was it birds?
Oh, it got me. No, it isn't.
Oh.
How dare you?
Well, I'm going to go with pond creatures.
How ever did you guess? I'm surprised he got me on, really, because it's almost he's more fish, I suppose, isn't it?
He's more fish. You do the little
known
things.
fact, he likes his herps more, doesn't he? He likes his frogs, toads, and lizards.
He does.
And the fish. But fish is his specialty. Right. So follow up and feedback time. I won't do a jingle this time. So let's start with. Well, I think I'll start with my bad influence spreading. Hazira Fourth, that's at Fourth H Hazira on Twitter, has set up a photographic aquarium, and literally just before we recorded posted some nice pictures of newts. So my bad influence is spreading. In fact, this might be a good time to mention we have plans in the works for a little special episode on lockdown nature photography, things you can do, little projects and stuff. So keep your ear out on social media, or eye out on social media for that.
Yeah, that's just going to be little mini projects you can do at home in your own house or garden. So that was up and coming, and it'll be a very special episode. So we've had a message from Nick Gates as well. The wet weather we've had recently, because I know Nick's he's nearer to me, and
it's not been wet here.
I can honestly say we've had 2 days of rain now. So
my pond is drying out.
Well, we've had 2 days of rain. Yeah, pretty much the last 2 days it's rained, and he said they've had a huge influx of snails emerging around the reed bed he's been visiting recently. So it's great to find and compare a trinity of striped patterns, all part of collective ruse to ensure some stay hidden from hungry thrushes. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Nick. Some great pictures there as well, which we'll retweet and share on our Twitter page, so you can check those out and have a look.
Yeah, I like the old banded snails. I get a few in my garden, actually. My daughter loves finding those, which is interesting. I've never had banded snails in my garden in Romford. So, yeah. I've also got a rare non-native snail, but I'll cover that in another podcast, I think. We've also had a message from Lydia, who said some very nice things about our podcast, but she's got a podcast she's starting herself, podcast on the fens where she lives. So that seems to be good. We'll give it a plug when it's launched.
Just keeps updated. And
she's also had some interesting sightings in her garden. She's lucky enough to have song thrushes visit, which is pretty good. Some more standard birds like great tits, goldfinch, starlings, wren. She's got jackdaws building nests on chimneys down her road. But the one I'm most jealous of is she's got house sparrows, but in them there's a couple of tree sparrows, which is That's quite special. I imagine apparently they were a lot more common before we started bird watching and stuff. In fact, because last few times I've been to Rutland without the bird feather, there hasn't been any tree sparrows by the feeders, and that's the first place I ever saw them. So they seem to be still disappearing, sadly. One of these many birds like turtle doves have been declining. She's also got a couple of hedgehogs coming in as well. It's another thing that's declining, and I haven't got in my garden as well. I did have them when I moved in, but I haven't seen one for years.
I've seen them kind of out and about when I've been, not recently, but last year when I was coming back from places in the evening, I've seen them out and about, but they can't get into our garden, unfortunately. Well, they could get into our garden, but they can't get into the gardens either side of us because of the fencing. So we don't get them, unfortunately.
Yes, hedgehogs. That's one podcast topic we should do. That's a good. I'm pretty sure there's a few experts out there we could get on as well. So
I'm pretty sure there is. Yeah. But what about our own sightings then? What have you been seeing, Neil?
Well, I've not much changed for last time. I had a woodlouse spider. So it beat you to it.
Yeah, so did I. But you wasn't in. Bet yours wasn't in a stranger place as mine was.
Go on then. Where's yours?
In our recycling bag that we keep in the house.
Mine was in a compost bag.
Okay.
I was in. Was it under it? I think it might have been under it. Sorry. It was. I was planting sunflower seeds with my daughter with a load of old compost. Put it this way: when we found the spider, the compost tray turned into make a home for the woodlouse spider, and she got quite annoyed. She set up a lovely thing with some logs and some stones. She got quite annoyed as I moved them to get a better angle and photograph it. No, Daddy, stop moving it! You're breaking the house.
Oh, see, ours was we were emptying out the recycling bag that we have just for paper recycling in the house. We were emptying it into our bin, and just like, oh, there's a woodlouse spider in the bottom of our paper recycling bag.
What was quite funny was, obviously I've raised my daughter, spiders don't want to hurt her. So I said to her, actually this one, Willow, we have to be a little bit careful. It doesn't want to bite us, but if it gets very scared, it might bite us. And she just looked at me, laughed and went, don't be silly, Daddy. I was like, no, this one actually can. I taught her too well.
Yeah, you have.
And what else have I seen? Like I said, I did a little exercise walk and I found out less than 5 minutes from my house I have linnet. And even more surprising, I've not seen swallows anywhere near my house, and there were swallows. Admittedly, it was about 5-10 minute walk down the road, but there's a load of stables and they were flying around the field there, so hopefully they nest there. So hopefully when the lockdown finishes I might be able to have a word with someone there and pop in and photograph some, because that'd be nice.
That'd be pretty cool.
I've had probably some other nice inverts and stuff I've seen, but I can't think off the top of my head. I've had a few. I think I had a Namada bee flying around and bee flies and all the stuff, but we mentioned that last time. Loads of hoverflies. Oh, my red mason bees have definitely woken up. I shared a quick phone video and it did quite well on social media. Unlike my actual photos, I spent ages photographing. The one I did a quick grab obviously did really well, but that's social media for you. Well, anything else on top of your woodlouse spider you've seen?
I've actually had quite an interesting week in my garden, actually, it has to be said. So lots of bees, loads of ants, which actually leads us quite nicely into today's main topic, butterflies. I actually have a starling that mimics a buzzard that sits in the hedge just to one side of the garden. And then two very interesting things have happened this week, and you know about one of them, Neil, because I told you about it. And so just doing some work in the garden, we've basically decided to rip the decking out and make it more wildlife friendly. And in the process of doing all this, we've seen the garden quite a bit. And this bird just comes dive bombing into the garden, brushes past my leg, touching my leg, and then kind of flies over the fence, which is only about waist height, into next door neighbour's garden, where it just kind of lands on their decking, looking a little stunned and shocked. It was only once it actually stopped we realised it was a sparrowhawk.
Nice.
And after a couple of minutes, it kind of, just took off and disappeared again. So that was definitely a close encounter of the wildlife kind. I've never had a sparrowhawk that close to me. I've certainly never had one touching me as it's come flying through the garden. And then also found out that we have a bee orchid growing in our garden, which is amazing. So here's a little lesson. Don't cut your lawn. You'll never know what might grow in it.
That is quite excellent, isn't it?
That's quite exciting. So waiting to see if that flowers. So we shall see. So yeah, that's been my wildlife week in my garden.
Well, one thing I did just thinking about, I just remembered, is the frogs have decided to show themselves in the daytime. So I think they've bred, gone off and refueled, and now it's so dry. There's two frogs. I can tell there's two different ones. Well, partly because I've seen them both at the same time now, but one's very dark and one's very pale. The pale one's very skittish, but the other ones you just rely on its camouflage and can sit quite still. And I have managed to get a few pictures of it. I've got one looking like it's winking at me. I must post soon. And my pond is just a writhing mass of tadpoles with some water in it now. There's like a ring of them around the pond when the sun's on it, around the edge. And I've started, because there's nothing in my pond apart from algae and a little bit of moss. I've started chucking in the old algae wafer tablets I had from when I had an algae and catfish many years ago. Well, a few years ago, I had a pot just kicking around. So and they've been eating them, so.
My tadpoles have been doing pretty well. I actually found 4 little frogs, so not big enough to breed.
No.
Probably last year's actually. But for all about the same size actually, so probably all from last year. 4 different ones, because again they're all slightly different colours, so it's quite easy to tell them apart around the pond. So I think they're quite happy. I've now finished the pond and finished edging it and sorting it out, so they're quite happy. And I also have a newt in the pond.
Oh, excellent. So what stage are your tadpoles up to?
They're still pretty small, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, mine are they're properly free swimming, but not quite that full size before they get to rear leg growing stage. So they're sort of halfway between the just hatched and the.
Yeah, mine are probably just over a centimetre, but definitely free swimming.
Oh no, mine are at least 2. Not as a competition or anything, but yeah, they get a lot of sun in the morning. Then it goes behind the house, and then they get a lot of sun from sort of like 2 o'clock, although the shade goes across it quite quickly. And there's lots of shallow areas the way I redesigned my pond, so they're just sitting in sort of 2 centimetres of water. Oh, and also they're feeding the blackbirds quite nicely too.
I see. We've actually had a couple of frosts.
I'll bring that up because I know how much you like that.
I had netted now, but we've actually had a couple of frosts.
Thursday I had a frost.
This week our pond was partially frozen over, and the bird baths were both frozen solid. So I don't think that's really helped.
Oh no, I don't think mine froze though. It's interesting. I'm probably not quite as high up as you, am I? So
I'm not quite as exposed either.
I'm fairly exposed, but yeah.
Yeah, it got pretty cold, so I think that's not really helped.
There's nothing between me and the Thames estuary really. So, but yeah, it's a slightly sheltered spot, that pond, I think. So right, better move on to the wildlife news, I think.
Yeah, which story are we going to start with?
I'll let you start with the surprise visitor to the river parrots, I think.
So it was something that I think possibly the last episode we recorded, or might have been the one before, but someone actually asked us about increased wildlife sightings, unusual wildlife sightings in urban areas, and this actually popped up, and I saw this this news article, and then Alan James, friend of the show, has actually kind of asked about it as well at the same time. And earlier or last week, there were 2 porpoise actually spotted in the River Parrot in Bridgewater, and later in the River Tone in Boroughbridge, and they're both in Somerset. And they actually spoke to a marine biologist, and he thinks they may have followed fish upstream and inland. And to give you an idea, it's about 15 miles inland from the sea. Now, as far as we know, they've probably headed back out to sea. I don't think they've been spotted again since. But apparently it's not the first time they've been spotted coming inland up the rivers. But it was a chap that filmed it. He was just out. It was actually right by his house, so he's not actively gone out and seeking them. And yeah, it's a lovely video of these 2 porpoise just swimming up the rivers in Somerset, which is amazing.
That is not that surprising, but we probably would have been to see it. Do you know what I mean? But it does happen. Seals quite commonly go upstream. A friend of mine, a couple of months ago, he works at Kew Gardens, and there was a seal in the Thames there, and I can't think, it's probably still slightly tidal there. I can't think where it stops being tidal, the Thames. I think it goes quite way up the Thames. But yeah, sea mammals do wander up. We had Benny the beluga in the Thames, who I did manage to see, but of course that's Thames estuary, so it's basically marine there anyway. Although it was unusual to have a beluga down that far south, but otherwise. And there's porpoises seen off Rainham, which is inside the M25. And there was a bottlenose dolphin around for a while as well at one point. So it's not that unusual, but fairly unusual. Kind of one of those, not as surprising as you think, but still a nice surprise kind of deals.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So what have you got for us, Neil?
I've got a few stories here. One that nearly made me cry, which is good news, but it nearly made me cry. For those that know their pond creatures are probably familiar with triops or tadpole shrimps, famous for being the living fossils. I hate that term. I'll explain why another time. And these are basically temporary pond specialist shrimps. They go up to sort of 2-3 inches long. The body's about an inch long. They've got these long tails. Think a horseshoe crab with rather than a one long spiky tail, they've got a sort of a normal tail with 2 little filamenty tails coming off it. They look like horseshoe crab underneath as well. Not really shrimps, but one of these mini crustaceans. They have eggs that can live for 100 years, dried out until conditions are right, and they only appear in this pond in the New Forest, the one and only pond, possibly a second one as well, but the one and only pond in the New Forest is the only one in England they're founding once every 2 or 3 years, usually in autumn, usually end of August, September. They need it to be warm enough, so I think it's above 15, 20 degrees centigrade, something like that. And they also need the water to be fresh rain, so it's lovely clean water, so there's no predators in there to compete with. And they complete their life cycle in a few weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks, month max. And they came out in spring this year, the year there's a lockdown, so I can't go and see them. And they're schedule 5, so I'd have to nag a friend of mine to take me. But it's like, oh, I want to see them. Because I haven't seen them only seen them twice, and that was both in the same year. God, when was that? 2015, 2016, something like that. Yeah, and they're just amazing creatures. But yeah, we're going to have to do a podcast on them. I'll talk to my friend Naomi about coming on again. She has agreed to. There's a silly story about a supposed large wildcat in Cambridgeshire, but it's clearly a domestic cat, so I'm not going to go into it too much about that. Big cats is another one we need to talk about at some point, but again, let's not go into that. Ridiculous things of the week. Some idiot with a fire lantern business tried to light a fire lantern for the NHS and let it go, which is a really great idea, because what happens is you light something on fire, you let it go into the air, and it can come down anywhere, possibly still on fire, like a recycling plant or a dry meadow or a hay bale or
a farmer's
the back of a cow or a horse, and scar it horribly, all of which will put more pressure on emergency services we're trying to help. And when he got probably the biggest pile down I've ever seen on Twitter, one-sided, because you usually get 1 or 2 people sticking up for people, there was like 1,500 replies, and I didn't see a single one supporting it. The fire service, the NHS, were all going, do not do this. And then he put out a supposed apology, which was, oh, it looks like lots of people have objected to us doing this for the NHS, so you can do it for the charity of your choice. And it's like, oh God, get the hint, man. But this bloke, he's got form. He tried to release. Do you remember? Some of you might remember in Germany, a fire lantern caused a fire.
I think I was actually over in Germany.
You
when
were,
this
yeah.
happened. Yeah.
You probably missed this then. He did raise money for the German zoo by buying one of our much safer, eco-friendly fire, because he has not these cheap ones with mercury and you get from China. He thinks they need to be better regulated, so you can only buy his ones. They're biodegradable, but that doesn't mean they dissolve instantly when they hit the ground, and there's still a fire risk. So
yeah, and I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, basically one of these fire lanterns,
Chinese, they call them Chinese fire lanterns, don't they?
Yeah, it came down at a zoo in Germany and devastated the zoo, killing a lot of animals, because it came down in the middle of the night when there wasn't anyone there. So that's, to cut a long story short.
And there were stories of keepers running into it, and they're literally sort of firemen holding them back to stop them going back in.
Really don't release fire lanterns of any kind. They're a really, really bad idea. And right now, I mean, we mentioned it earlier in the podcast, we've had a couple of days of rain here in Somerset, but Neil said, you guys haven't had anything over there. The ground is dry. So please, please, please just listen to us, listen to the NHS, listen to the fire service, the police. Do not release these for any reason, please.
I mean, I forgot what I was going to say now, but yeah, that it's just a ridiculous idea. But talking of ridiculous ideas, Natural England. I do have friends who work for Natural England. I'm going to start this story off by saying there are some amazing people that work at Natural England, and dear God, they must be fervently embarrassed. I mean, we've had
pulling their hair out.
Yeah, pulling their hair out. That's one way of putting it. The hen harriet, stupid brood meddling man. But the latest thing is they have granted a license to take wild peregrines from the nest for falconry, to keep as pets, so they can breed them and have a pure British stock of peregrines. Which, just okay, might not do any damage to the numbers of peregrines, but there's a few potential issues here. Is one, why? There's plenty of captive peregrines. For those who don't know, falcons are worth an absolute fortune in the Middle East. I think it's £6,000 each. I read a figure for peregrines, and until the 90s, it was rife. People were nicking the chicks and the eggs from nests, and they introduced DNA testing. You had to DNA register your peregrine. Now, I have to admit, I'm not totally up on the ins and outs of this, but from what I've read, they have deregulated it somewhat, so they think there's more of this going on now. It's because the DNA testing has been scaled back, austerity again for you. And this, why give these people a license to take wild birds when there's no conservation benefit? That's the whole point, you know. And they're claiming it's not for profit. Oh, it's so us falconers can have a purebred line. Why do you want a purebred line? Considering the amount of falconry birds that have escaped of various species, I dare say there's a lot of non-British DNA now. This is speculation, I'll be honest, but just why?
Yeah,
why?
it's a crazy idea. It really is.
Do you want to introduce beavers? Well, there's a whole lot of tick lists you've got to go through. You want to take stuff from the wild? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, do you want to photograph great crested newts? Well, you've got to jump from, yeah. I don't know about that. I think just ridiculous. You know, I've got to get loads of things signed off if I want to photograph a Schedule 5 species. These people are allowed to take peregrines from the wild for what, in my view, is not a valid reason. And I think a lot of people's views are valid. I think the RSPB have objected to it, and a lot of people have. And yeah, but there we go. Yet another dumb move by Natural England. I hate to say it.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be one that's going to be well supported. From the little bits that I've picked up on and what I've read, I don't think it's going to be a well supported one. Hopefully, it will disappear into one of those crazy ideas that never came to fruition.
I think it's more likely to slip under the radar. They'll kill and keep it. But there we go.
Hey-o, shall we move on to something incredibly interesting and our main topic for the evening? I keep saying for the evening. This is because we actually record in the evening, for anyone that doesn't know.
Yeah. We don't. Well, see, some people might speculate we start in the morning, the amount we go on, but
we actually just talk for hours and hours. Yeah. Anyway, the main topic of this episode is ants. You might actually find it quite interesting. There are over 39 species of ant in the UK. 7 of these are introduced and 4 are endemic. And don't worry, we're not going to talk about all 39 species of ants. We'd need a lot longer than our normal hour to do that. So what we've decided to do is pick the 3 most common species that you would most likely find in your garden or in an urban environment. So, if you live in a town, the ones that you would most likely find around you, or if you've got a garden, the ones that you'd most likely find in your garden. And these are, off you go, Neil.
The black garden ant, Lasius niger. The red garden ant, or the European fire ant, I've seen written, I don't like that name. Basically, or the red ant, we tend to call them here in the UK, which is, now I might pronounce this slightly wrong, Myrmica rubra. And there's a few species of Myrmica. And the last one is the meadow ant, or yellow meadow ant, which is Lasius, and I've forgotten the species name.
Flavus,
that's the one. Lasius flavus. Now, I'm going to do a quick footnote. When I mentioned it was these 3 species we were doing on Twitter, Ben Andrew, probably in complete shock, wondered why I wasn't covering wood ants, which is one of my obsessions. And that is because they're so good, they need a whole episode to themselves, as far as I'm concerned. So and we can't all get out to see them at the moment. So, because trust me, when we cover wood ants, the first thing you'll want to do is go straight out and see them.
It is, for sure.
Yeah, but yeah.
Which is why we decided let's go for species, certainly at the moment, that you are most likely to find in your garden or around where you live. So you might see them out on your daily exercise or in your own garden. That way you don't have to go out looking for them. Just going to start with a couple of little notes, because I think ants are a bit of a Marmite species. I think people either love them or hate them. A lot of people do see them as pests. So just kind of put down a couple of things that might make you actually think twice about them. And it's a kind of a general thing when it comes to ants. And ants can actually be really good for the garden, and generally speaking are harmless. There are some exceptions. They actually help to aerate the soil, because when they burrow into it, making their nests, obviously help turn the soil over. They recycle nutrients, return detritus to the earth, and it actually helps to improve soil fertility, allowing more oxygen and water to reach the roots of plants. And they also act as really good pest controllers in your garden as well, believe it or not. And when you see them in massive numbers, you're probably thinking, really? But they do act as quite good pest controllers. And they're also vital in various mutualistic relationships of our blue butterfly species in particular, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. And with some species, they thought they might actually aid with seed dispersal and also help pollinate some flowers. So, they're not all bad. And actually, I think when you get to know them, and hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll be with Neil and I on thinking that they're absolutely wonderful little creatures. So I think let's get going with the black garden ant. This is the one that we most often find in our gardens. It is certainly the most common ant in our gardens and urban environments. They're found in areas where the ground's generally open, dry and warmed by the sun. So you very rarely will find them in woodlands or damp areas or shady areas. They do like that kind of warm area. And quite often they'll nest under paving slabs, rocks, bits of wood, anything that basically can be warmed by the sun. And the nests are actually really quite large. So they normally have a single queen and then anything up to about 10,000 workers. So you're talking about quite a big nest here. And these are actually the ants that you'll see out foraging. I mean, if you go, I've spent a lot of time in my garden working on it in this past week and I'll be back in the garden this week. And I've got ants everywhere, like literally I can't move for ants in some parts of my garden. They are. And particularly around the pond at the moment as well. So at least when my little froglets emerge, they're going to have a good food source. But these ants are they're out foraging. They scavenge and feed on small invertebrates and can actually be aggressive and attack other ants. So, if you've got half an hour or whatever, maybe just sit in your garden and watch them and see what they do. And they actually have a really interesting thing that you can do this in your garden. Probably not yet. We probably need to wait till a little bit later on in kind of later spring and then into summer. But their other main food source is actually honeydew, which is like a sugary substance that's produced by aphids. And ants will actually tend, or is known as farming, aphids. And then they milk these aphids by basically, they stroke the aphid with their antennae and it encourages the aphid to produce this little drop of sugary substance. And they actually farm them and milk them for this. And they'll look after them on the plants, they'll protect them from predators. And you can actually see this in your own garden. So if you find an area where you see a lot of ants on a stem of a plant, have a look, because if there's aphids there, it's something that you can observe, which is quite fascinating. I don't know if it's something you've seen, Neil.
Oh yeah, I have, yeah. It's
absolutely fascinating. And these are actually the ants that we generally see when it comes to Flying Ant Day. And I'm going to come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But just before I do, now this isn't going to be true of everywhere in the country, and actually it's only probably a very small area in the country that this would really apply to. But the black ant actually has a really interesting and intimate relationship with the silver-studded blue butterfly. So the adult female butterfly can detect black ant nests and will lay her eggs close to a nest. When the caterpillar hatches from the egg, it's immediately attractive to the ants. And after its first skin molt, the caterpillar has developed secretory organs that produce a saccharine secretion, which is fortified with amino acids. And it's this substance that's really attractive to the ants. And they'll actually kind of take it into the nest and they'll look after it. And when these caterpillars go out foraging at dusk, they're actually accompanied by the ants as well. So they have that protection all the way through. And this will go right the way through until the butterfly eventually emerges from the chrysalis. And when the butterfly emerges from the chrysalis, and this happens underground in the ant's nest, for some butterflies it's deep within the nest, and for others it's in one of the kind of entry chambers. But the furry body is actually covered in droplets of liquid. And as it leaves the nest, it's accompanied by anywhere around 4 to 8 ants, which continue to tend to the butterfly, removing these droplets until the butterfly's inflated its wings and it's ready to take to the air. So, these ants are actually really vitally important to some of our really kind of special and rapidly declining species of blue butterfly in particular as well. So if you're in an area that's got silver-studded blue butterflies, definitely something to keep an eye out. But what about flying ants? How do you feel about flying ants, Neil?
Oh, they're great food for dragonflies.
And swifts, actually. Apparently,
and black-headed gulls. You always get a swarm of them by them, don't you?
Yeah, they're fantastic food source, actually. So we actually, when we put it out there that we were going to do an episode on ants, had quite a few people come in actually and say, ask about Flying Ant Day. They're actually isn't a thing as Flying Ant Day. There isn't one day of the year where all of the ants erupt from the ground and come out. There's actually a flying ant season, and this runs from about June to September, and there will be a few peak days within that. But that'll only be when the conditions are just right. And I'll come on to like the conditions that are needed in just a second. But the ants that we see, the flying ants, they're very different to the black ants that we see in the garden, but it is the same species. So the flying ants are actually mature, fertile, winged male and female ants. And the females are much, much bigger than the males. So if you see them together, you'll be able to tell in the size difference which is the male and the female. And basically, as the colony matures, the queen will produce virgin queens and winged males. And it's these ants that we actually see erupt from the ground in huge, huge numbers en masse. And it's not, you'll normally get several nests all kind of erupting at the same time in an area. And the reason they do this is it allows them to all take to the wing at the same time, disperse further, and increases their chances of mating between different colonies. So they're not mating with ants from the same colony. And the large numbers, I mean, there is this whole safety in numbers, and this is definitely true with ants. You know, the huge numbers that we see erupting, it does give protection from predators because there's just so many of them. And if you're actually lucky enough to see one of these erupt, I saw this for the first time properly, actually witnessed this last year at my parents' house, actually. And I was just about to leave, and all of a sudden the ground just erupted, and about 5 nests in the garden just all came to life at one time. And if you look closely, you may actually find a male and a female joined together, and this is actually called their nuptial flight. And it's a once in a lifetime event where for the winged adults, and the females will actually mate with several males during that time. Once the nuptial flight is over, the queen actually loses her wings, and I've seen various reports of her actually chewing the wings off, and she will then head off in search of a suitable place to start her own colony. And the sperm the female actually receives during that mating will allow her to lay fertilized eggs for the rest of her life, and that can be up to about 15 years in the wild. So, you know, that's quite a long time. And the males are only produced by the colony during flying ant season, and after mating, generally speaking, they die after a day or two if they haven't been gobbled up by birds or anything else that's on the hunt for a meal. But why does it happen, and why do we get them? Well, you know, why do they all erupt at the same time? What triggers it? And to put it quite simply, it's actually the weather. They're really good at detecting the weather, and the weather conditions need to be just right for the winged adults to erupt from the nests. And this generally means warm and humid conditions with minimal wind. And most mass flying events happen on days following a period of warm and humid weather. So if you have like 3 or 4 days where it's been quite warm and humid, then there's a good chance that the next day there might be, you know, a flying ant day. And a really interesting study by the Royal Society of Biology found that the temperature needs to be above 13 degrees centigrade. Now, I don't consider that to be that warm. You know, warm to me is anything over about 20 degrees centigrade, but I like the warm weather. And wind speeds have to be less than 6.3 meters per second. But what they did find is on days with mean temperatures above 25 degrees, there were flying ants somewhere. So, you know, we are talking those low to mid 20s really are the best times for the ants to start taking to the wing. And the swarms of flying ants we actually see are made up of about 90% black ants. There are, you know, our other species do actually have flying ant days as well. And, you know, you may see, I think, certainly the yellow meadow ant also doesn't. I believe the red ant has these flying ant days as well. It's just not in the sheer numbers that we tend to see with the black garden ant. But then the black garden ant is a far more common species, and there's a lot more of them. But sometimes these swarms, if the conditions are absolutely perfect for these, swarms in the south of England have actually appeared looking almost like rain on weather forecast maps, moving kind of, I think one record had it moving south from South Hampshire to West Sussex, and it actually appeared like a cloud on a weather map. It was that big. So, you know, hopefully that's answered a few questions about Flying Ant Day, and, you know, maybe made you think a little bit differently about those black ants that you see in the garden. And, you know, if the conditions are just right this year and we get Flying Ant Day, just go out and have a look. they're completely harmless. Yes, they do get everywhere, but put a hat on, it's fine. But they're not going to bite, and it's a really fascinating thing to actually watch. And even for, you know, maybe not them either the moment they erupt, or even if you have a look around about 10-15 minutes after. I mean, these eruptions, they don't last very long. You're probably talking about 15 minutes at most, and then it's like nothing happened. It's a really quick thing, but you know, maybe go out and try and have a look and see if you can find one this summer, if you can.
Yeah, it's funny, by something of a coincidence, the first time I met Stephen Moss, he came down to see the southern migrant hawker dragonflies in a local site to me, and we were stood there, me, him, his daughter, and a few other dragonfly enthusiasts. And as we're watching this southern migrant hawker, we're one waiting for it to hover, but of course, right at our feet, we're standing on a big concrete slab. Right at our feet, a black ant nest decided to erupt, and the southern migrant hawker was just whizzing through the cloud of ants as they came up. Obviously, no chance for a photo, but amazing to watch. I mean, these days I'll be able to film it on my camera, on slow motion, which would have been cool, rather special to see. And I did once, like you say, once the flying ants have happened, for the next day or two, you quite often find the queens without wings walking around on pavements and stuff. And a few years ago, I scooped up 2 or 3 of them, I think it was, and put them in little pots with some sugar. And I got at least 2 of them to get to the point of laying eggs, and 1 to the point of having larvae, and a couple of workers. And then they died off. Apparently, they are quite hard to keep compared to some species. Yeah, amazing creatures.
They are absolutely fascinating.
Mm.
So what have you got for us then, Neil?
I'm going to go with the red ant, which I have mixed feelings about, as you'll find out shortly. The red ant, also known as Myrmica rubra, which is the common species. There are a few species, one of which is famous for being the host to the large blue butterfly, but I'll mention that a bit later. So these ants are about 3 to 5 millimeters long. They're sort of reddish brown in colour. The males, when they emerge, if you saw the video of your video, Victoria, of the ants emerging and flying, which we put up a few days ago, I'm pretty sure that's what this species was, because the males are pretty much black with a little bit of red on them, and the queens are mostly red, but again with black patches on. So they look a bit like sort of red-coloured black ants. But the ones you find tend to be the workers. So they're widespread, found in many habitats. They're the species of this genus that's most found in towns. That's why we're covering them. Now, they're a bit different to the black ants, which have, you know, fairly large nests. These only have hundreds of workers, right? You know, average of 1,000. But they vary between a few tens up to 8,000 found in one nest. It's quite interesting, the ratio. So whereas I believe the black ant nests tend to have 1 queen, or very few, the red ants tend to have 1 queen per sort of 10 individual workers. So they have multiple queens. They're polygynous, and it's a bit flexible how the nest works. So so when you find a colony, it might actually be lots of nests connected together, and you can end up with sort of super colonies in some species of ants. Which, in a slight digression, there's a species, I forget what it is, there's a non-native one in the Mediterranean, and there's one super colony that stretches for sort of hundreds of miles on the coastline. When you think of colonial insects, I tend to think of sort of how honeybees, that's what we're taught at school, but ants can be very flexible on this. There's something interesting going on with the queens as well with this species. You have the standard queens. So queens tend to be bigger than the workers. It's got to produce all these eggs and hold the sperm and stuff like that. And they're called macrogines. But they also have microgines, which are almost worker-sized queens. They're omnivorous, this species. They'll take seeds, small inverts, aphids, spiders, worms, stuff like that. But they'll also take honeydew from the aphids as well, so they farm them too. It's very similar with the swarms with the black ants. They'll come out quite often at the same time as the black ants, which is quite interesting. But they obviously can tell each other apart. I wonder if there ever is any mix-up there. Another way they reproduce as well. Oh, yeah.
I was going to just go keeping an eye on those swarms now and the matings to see what happens.
Yeah. And the one way they work is they sort of bud off sometimes. So the queen will take a few workers off and form a new colony. Quite often, when the queens have mated, they'll go back into an existing colony and integrate into that. And now the thing they're famous for is quite a lot of people, and I don't know about you, Victoria, when I was raised, I was told the yellow ants, the orange ants, the yellowy orange ants, which is the yellow meadow ant, were the ones that sting, but it's not. It's these guys.
I was always told the red ants. We always had black and red ants.
Yeah,
and
but
they were
yellow.
red ants.
Yeah, because the ones that I always found were yellow, and I was told they were the red ants because they're sort of orangey yellow. But they're quite clearly, and these look at different shapes as black ants. They look almost like they've got too many segments in their thorax between the head and the, to my eyes anyway. They've got a sort of a weirder shaped thorax, and they don't bite. Everyone's always, oh, these ants bite. Well, now wood ants can bite, but to me they're not painful. But I'm probably used to it by now. They sting, which sort of betrays their the fact that ants are actually within the family of wasps. Family, not wasp family. That's totally the wrong word. Within the group that includes wasps and bees, the Hymenoptera and sawflies. They probably, I couldn't find out anything in the short time I researched it, but they probably evolved the ability to sting independently. But that's and the colonialism they evolved independently too, which is quite interesting. That Hymenoptera is a whole topic in itself. Now, one thing that's interesting is these colonies will only be active from this month onwards. So they've hibernated most of winter. In fact, they start hibernating by late September. So they're only active sort of spring, summer. The workers, like I say, can sting, and they're quite aggressive if you make the mistake of accidentally, inverted commas, attacking the nest, which is what I did once by putting my camera bag on the nest. Noticed there's a few of these red ants off, brushed them off, thought, oh, that was close. Glad I spotted those. I didn't realise there was still a few on there. About a minute later, I'm walking along and I'm getting shooting pains all down my arm and shoulder where they've all stung me at the same time. Now, I did some research and I couldn't find anything specifically on British Myrmica species, but the fire ant, which is in the same family, that's the infamous one that's invaded everywhere, will release an alarm pheromone, so they all sting at once, which you imagine is rather effective. Yeah. Oh,
it hurts a lot.
Hurt for that whole morning.
I've actually been on the receiving end of fire ants.
Actually,
in the Caribbean, I was on the receiving end of fire ants, and they got me on both feet and both ankles. And needless to say, I spent the next day. I was actually working out there, and I spent the next day with my feet in the swimming pool, and everything was done from me sitting on the edge of the swimming pool with my feet in the swimming pool because it was cold. So I can actually, from experience, say that yes, fire ant stings are horrific, and they all basically sting at the same time. They do release this pheromone that gets them to sting at the same time, and it's painful, not gonna lie. Hurts a lot.
Something that I found satisfying and you will probably find more satisfying. Have you heard about ant decapitating flies? Are you familiar with those? Now, these are a group of flies. They're famous for doing it to fire ants, but there is a species that does it to Myrmica rubra. Now, most of these ant decapitating flies home in on the smell of formic acid because a lot of ants produce formic acid. Wood ants are a classic one, but they worked out as the attacking pheromones they used in Myrmica, because obviously they produce this acid, they have a sting, and they detect this pheromone. The female flies down and lays an egg in the ant and flies away. And that egg hatches inside. Think alien again. It happens a lot in insects.
It does.
Hatches. It feeds around in the body and makes its way to the head, where it feeds on bodily fluids, and it starts to manipulate the ant's behaviour. A bit of mind control going on. Body snatchers coming in there, tries to make it stay in the nest. Now the ants watch out for this, and if they detect an ant behaving strangely, they take it out of the nest. But it tries to stay in the safety of the nest for a while, and then just before the fly needs to pupate, it makes the ant go out to find some damp leaf litter, so it's nice and humid to pupate in. Then it starts eating away at its brains and stuff, hollows out the ant's head, then produces a chemical that loosens the tissues between the head and the thorax, and the ant's head falls off, which it then seals up the hole, bites a hole in the mouth ready to emerge from, and pupates inside the hollowed out head of an ant, which is rather excellent if you ask me. So there is a price to being a successful animal, is that lots of things will take advantage. There's a few nest parasites, there's the microdon hoverflies, there's a few parasitic wasps, and of course the famous caterpillars of blue butterflies. Now, Myrmica rubra in the UK isn't a host, not successfully anyway, I don't believe, to any of the blue butterflies here. And there's a couple of large blue butterflies in Europe that it is host to, but related species are host to the large blue butterfly. And I've done a little bit of research. I think we'll cover that in a topic in itself. I think the blue butterflies is a podcast in itself. And it's quite interesting to read because they have such small nests. 85% of these Myrmica species nests are too small to support one caterpillar. And even those that are big enough can only take one. So if two caterpillars get in a nest, they can wipe out the ants. And even the ones that where they can support it, they'll probably devastate the nest to a point that it won't survive. We've got one more species to cover, and I think I'll let you have the honour of that one.
You're too kind. It is the yellow meadow ant, Lasius flavus, which, again, like Neil said, is quite often, this is one, you might find in the garden, you mistake it for a red ant. They're actually, I think I've only ever seen them out when I've been doing surveys for chalk-hill blue butterflies, and there's a reason for that, which I'm going to allude to a little bit later on. But the ones that I've seen, they're very definite kind of yellowy orangey. It's not something for me. Whenever I've seen red ants in the garden, they've been obviously red ants. There's been no kind of yellowiness in them at all. So, but then it probably varies from around the country. And these are, again, I think most of the ants we get in our gardens are very similar sizes. So these are about 2 to 4.5 millimeters in length, and again, I think a little bit probably more like the red ant. Colonies are much larger, like the black ant, but they can either have one or a few queens, whereas black ant colonies generally just have one queen. So so a little bit of both there. But these ants you're not likely to see. And the simple reason for that is that they live almost entirely underground, tending to avoid sunlight. The main sign that you'll see if you've got yellow meadow ants in your garden are mounds on the surface. They look a little bit like a molehill, but covered in plants, basically. And they don't come above the ground. There's been a few reports of them coming above the ground at dusk in relation to chalk-hill blue butterflies again. But they, as with quite a lot of the other ant species, they also feed on the honeydew produced from aphids, and they actually, again, farm and milk the aphids to produce a drop of honeydew. But they will also feed on the roots of plants growing in or around the mound or nest, seeds, other small invertebrates. So kind of similar foraging and food patterns to the other ants that we'd find in our gardens. They're more commonly found on meadows, roadside verges. Well, I've never seen one on a roadside verge, but I'll take your word for it, Neil.
Yep.
We kind of did, we both did the research on this, so we kind of researched different areas. And sometimes you can find them in lawns, but this will only be if the lawn is left unmown for long periods of time. If you're constantly mowing your lawn, you're not going to find yellow meadow ant nests. They do also swarm like our other ants, but it tends to be kind of late afternoon, July to September time, mainly in August. So they have a much shorter kind of flying ant season than our more common black ants. And then they'll actually go off and start new colonies with, one or more queens, whereas with the black ants, it is just the one. But as we mentioned with the other ants, with both the black ant and the red ant, there is the distinctive relationship with blue butterflies. And as Neil said, we will cover this, I think, probably in more detail because it is fascinating. But the yellow meadow ant has a very distinct relationship with, in particular, the chalk-hill blue butterfly. And it's a butterfly that I actually know very well. It's one that I've surveyed in this area, well, specifically this area, but we do get colonies of them here. Probably one of my favorite butterflies, if I'm honest. And the caterpillar actually secretes a 15% solution of sugars, and this is mainly sucrose, and it has more than 14 different amino acids. And it's these amino acids that make it attractive to the ants. The ants actually will take the caterpillar into the nest, providing protection from predators. And when the caterpillar emerges at dusk, again, it's normally accompanied by the ants. So there's a lot of crossover and very similar behaviors between our ants and our butterflies, but it shows just how important these ants are to some of the butterflies and these amazing relationships that they actually have. And with the different caterpillar species produce secretions with different numbers of amino acids in. Chalk-hill blue has 14 different ones. I think a lot of the other blue butterflies, it tends to be about 6 or less, so it's a lot less from that. But again, another really fascinating little ant species.
Yeah, with them living underground most of the time, I'm trying to think. I suppose you find them under stones more, but you see, where's the other two you might find wandering around? I've found red ants on nettles and black ants. They come in your house sometimes even, don't they? Whereas a meadow ant, I'm trying to think, other than mowing a lawn that had hills in, and obviously in petrol mower plus anthill doesn't really mix very well. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen one, sort of just wandering around. They just don't do it, do they? They live in, they're subterranean almost. Probably is the word, isn't it? I think they do come to surface rarely, but
yeah, I mean, you're more likely to see them if you go out, in certainly with chalk-gill blue butterflies. I mean, they don't start emerging as adults until about July, so maybe June time. If you're out and about, then
the butterflies lure them out.
Yeah, I mean, basically when the caterpillars come out to forage, the ants will come out with them. That's probably your best chance of seeing a yellow meadow ant, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll dig up a mound. Not that I recommend that.
No.
For scientific reasons.
So there we go. There's our three probably most common species, or certainly the three species you're most likely to find in your garden, generally speaking.
Probably the three are the most common as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And we did have like a last minute kind of couple of questions come in from Fiona Marshall on Twitter, and I'm hoping we've kind of covered most of your questions, Fiona, because there's quite a few in there. But she actually asked, how much does an ant weigh? So
sounds like a joke.
Yeah, it does sound like a joke.
Well, they're heavy if they're giants.
He had to get that one in, didn't he?
Had to get a joke. Well, I'm just annoyed. I mean, I'm annoyed there's no real learning behaviour, because then I could have gone, what is this? A school for ants? But I could not squeeze it in anywhere. So I just really shoehorned it in there.
Yeah, you have. Anyway, moving swiftly on.
Yeah.
So basically, there are hundreds of species of ants across the world. Some of them are absolutely huge, and some of them are teeny tiny. So in answer to your question, Fiona, I'm just going to answer it in terms of the ants that we've covered, and they're generally speaking between 1 to 2 micrograms from what I can find out. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot on the weight of ants. Size, they're pretty much all of them are between about 2 to 5 millimeters, so they're all roughly around about the same size. But yeah, between about 1 to 2 milligrams, generally speaking, that seems to be the figure that comes up. As she asked about Flying Ant Day, hopefully that's kind of covered it. There's no such thing as Flying Ant Day. There is a hashtag that trends on Twitter called Flying Ant Day, and then I think people get a little bit antsy.
Oh dear.
When they see, there's about 4 or 5 of them that pop up in the space of a couple of weeks, and you see people go, oh, there's only supposed to be one Flying Ant Day. There isn't. There's going to be peaks all the way through Flying Ant period. And the other thing that she actually asked, she's got colonies in her front and back garden. Would these be separate colonies, or would they be one colony? Now, I guess it depends on how far away your front and back garden are.
Yeah.
So, if it's black ants, I'm going to say it's probably separate colonies, because I don't think
it varies with. We'll find out more and more. There's a brilliant David Attenborough, isn't it, on the wood ants, where basically a whole mountain side works together as one huge super colony, whereas the same species on the next mountain over are at each other's throats, and you get I don't want to pretend to be an expert on it, but my understanding a lot of these species is you'll sometimes get 2 colonies that are basically at war all the time. Then another 2 colonies will tolerate each other and not cooperate, but they won't fight, and then others that start cooperating, and some that are basically a super colony. So yeah, they're probably, like you say, they're probably likely separate, but can't rule out some sort of, especially if they're related, them working together.
And I think it does depend on the setup as well. I know that I've got black ant colonies in my front garden, and I've got black ant colonies in my back garden, but I'm pretty sure they're actually separate colonies. The distance apart that they are, and also with the house and where they are, and it's front and back gardens are actually very different as well. I would say they're probably different colonies, but it just depends, I think, as well, that distance between them. When you see some of the when you see the nests erupt with the flying ants, quite often you'll see like 4 or 5 in close proximity, all erupting at the same time. Now, they could be one super colony with like separate little offshoots, or it could be 4 or 5 separate colonies. It's without actually, I think, digging down and investigating, there's no way of really knowing. But again, and I think that really kind of answers her other question, which is how big is an ant colony?
Yeah.
And I know studies have been done in South America. I think it's more with termites, actually. They've done it where they've actually poured the latex into termite
They do it with
mounds.
ants as well. Yeah, no. Sometimes it's liquid aluminium and steel and stuff, isn't it? They pour it down the nest. It vaporizes the ants, but then they dig out these desert ants that go down sort of 4 or 5 meters. Huge,
Yeah.
great things.
Yeah. So how big are that underground nest? It's kind of no real way of knowing unless you want to go out and dig it up and find out.
Yeah.
Which I do not suggest.
Yeah. I mean, one way of telling, I know of wood ants, they've done to see what, because wood ants are notorious, is that the right word? They're well known for having satellite colonies. So you'll have a main nest, but then you'll have a smaller nest sort of 100 meters away, but the ants will work between them. They're the same. Again, they've got multiple queens. It all gets very confusing. But what you can do is take a worker from one and drop it near the other one. And if they attack it, you know it's from a different colony. Again, I only recommend doing this with science. Something I've always wanted to do. There's a couple of local wood ant woods, and I always wanted to map out where the colonies were. But again, that's something I think someone did do it once. But it'd be fascinating to work out what trees are in what colony, and it's quite a simple thing to do. You know, you just take one ant from that nest and take it over to there and see if they cooperate or fight. And
I think with the wood ants it's a little bit easier as well because the nests are so much more visible.
Oh yeah, and they're big, so you can watch the behaviour easier and stuff like that. And when they fight, boy, do you know it. I once witnessed a wood ant fight, but that's for the wood ant episode.
Yes.
Have you? Do you know there's something I didn't get managed to squeeze in? Did you see about the water test for telling the gender of an ant?
I didn't find that one. No.
No. Yeah, basically, if you put the ant in the water, and if it's a girl ant, it sinks, and if it floats, it's a boy ant.
Okay. I feel like this is a joke.
Did you not get that? If it floats, it's a boy ant.
Yeah, sorry, it's 10:30.
I see. When my colleague who worked with me for nearly 10 years, he could tell. Even when I managed to subtly put it in the conversation, he could tell it was coming. For me, that was quite subtle. No, normally it's kind of, oh, here's a completely irrelevant comment. But
Did you know?
Yeah, I'm sure we could have done an ant and deck joke somewhere as well, but I refuse to, give too much oxygen to them. They're far too popular. Don't dislike them. They just seem to be everywhere all the time on terrible shows that I hate. But nothing personal against them. I used to like Barker Grove, and then I haven't liked a single program they've been in since. But there we go. Well, I think that might be it from us now then, I think we actually, for once, we actually covered everything at the start and didn't leave anything out. I'm really hoping we haven't now I've said that.
No, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Time to call time then.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully we've been able to open your eyes to see ants in a different way. And, maybe if you're out in your garden, it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be a lovely week across the board in the UK this week. So maybe go out and just grab a cup of tea and go and sit and watch the ants for 10 minutes and, see what you can see. And, some really interesting behaviors when you sit and watch them. And hopefully, so we've helped, maybe if you have not been a big ant lover, maybe we've helped change your mind a little bit about them.
Yeah, and if we haven't convinced you, wait till we do the wood ant episode.
Yeah.
Find us on Twitter, Facebook, so UK Wildlife Podcast on Facebook, UK Wildlife Pod on Twitter, UK_wildlife for me, and
VixPics, VIKSPICS for me. Yeah. And also, if you want to kind of check out a few little invertebrate facts, I've been starting to post a little bit more on my Forgotten Little Creatures page as well. If you just type in 4 little creatures, that will pop up, because I've been posting some of the ant stuff on there, because ants didn't appear in the first book. Shocking, I know, but
you haven't got masses of wood ants like me around here, so
no. But given the next book is going to cover the whole of the UK, that means wood ants are going to have to go in there.
Oh, definitely, they're awesome.
So
yep, buy a book. So get interacting with the show, guys. So talk to us on Facebook and Twitter. So what you've been seeing, any wildlife or wildlife photography questions. If you've been doing any interesting projects that you don't mind us stealing for our special show, do get in touch. We'll give you credit. And
let us know.
Oh God, I've turned into the thing I hate the most. We'll pay you in credit and exposure.
Yeah, just get in touch. Let us know. And if you've got some interesting pictures or anything, or you need anything, you've got any questions, anything you want us to try and identify, share it, and we'll try our best. I mean, we're both pretty much working from home now. Well, I work from home anyway. There's no real change there. But
any recordings you've made as well, nature. And in nature recordings, preferably, not for local steam engine or whatever it is. Yeah,
we're going to have some interesting ones coming up, including my starling.
And I got my starling, which is a herring gull followed by a green woodpecker, followed by a few other things. So that should be quite interesting.
Whereas mine is just a buzzard. It is actually a starling mimicking a buzzard.
Right, I guess we'll say goodbye. Thanks for listening and stay safe.
Yeah, take care and get going on those gardens and see what you can find.
Bye for now.
Bye.